Welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast. This is the first episode going live in 2023, and over the Christmas break and the New Year, I started reading a book. I enjoyed that book, so we got a hold of the author. And now, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, my name is Josh Baker. I wrote the book Deinfringe, and I wrote that while I was having my own gun business, and of course making memes on Instagram. So yeah.
Well, there we go. I've got it in the frame for a minute. We'll try to post a link to that in below. But yeah, so you can find it on Amazon if you haven't started looking for it already, for those who are listening on the podcast. But this is the Redacted Culture Cast, where in 2023 we are part of the change in gun culture, not just observing it. So thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting the channel. Our new merch is going up on the site as we speak, or should already be up there now. We've got some new patches and new stickers and stuff. Those are up there because it allows me to have an outlet for some creativity, and also it keeps the show running. It keeps the bills on, and then the new lighting functioning. So thank you very much for supporting us. You can head over to redactedllc.com, and then also get ready for Season 1, Operation 2. If you know what I'm talking about, looking forward to it. So, Josh, the title of your book, Deinfringe, the subtitle being "The Truth About Our Rights and Answers to the Myths That Have Been Spread About Them." It's very much so a Second Amendment heavy book. Maybe you could say that's the topic of choice. And what you introduce the book with is what I would say is a bit of a history of philosophy concept, instead of it just being pure philosophy, where you start talking about even going back to Aristotle, how different cultures and times have referred to or considered an individual's right to self-defense. And so this is very much so a rights-based argument drawn across history. And so when did you write the book, and what was the impetus behind it? How did that get started?
Sure. So kind of the long story about it is when I was preparing to open up my gun shop, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do concealed carry classes. And what I hated about the concealed carry classes was how much it's pretty much a garbage. Most of it, you're not getting any kind of good training, but you still have to sit around for 8 hours.
Depending on the state, but yeah.
Yeah. But you look at around and you're like, there's a lot of people who are not really, let's say, gun people in those concealed carry classes. It's a pretty big gamut, because there are, a lot of people in the different sides of the political spectrum that go to those classes because they want to carry. Well, it's like, well, wouldn't that be the greatest time to pitch them why we have the Second Amendment, what it means, natural rights, stuff like that. So I'm like, well, if I do a concealed carry class, I'm going to throw this hour-long, 2-hour-long, kind of probably an hour-long, PowerPoint into that. So this all started from a stupid PowerPoint that I started making, and just for when I was going to do concealed carry classes. Never did the concealed carry classes, but I just kept on making that PowerPoint bigger and bigger, and then I was like, you know what? I'll make this into like a pamphlet or something. So the original pamphlet was only I think it was 20 pages, and it almost looked more like a comic book. It had a lot of graphics and stuff in there. And it was just available on, I just had it on my website at that time. And, but then it just kept on being like, you know what, I need to add this. Oh, I better add this. You can't answer this unless you go answer this. And it just, it expanded to, it's 300 pages now. And I have my phone is filled with notes of what I need to update and add into it. But yeah, so it just kind of spiraled out of control. And it was just, there was so much little nuances or something like that. But you'd go to explain one topic, and it was like, you know what, I better give the history, or at least explain why that topic matters. And so that's just kind of how it kind of spiraled out. And that's how I kind of broke it down, where you have the natural rights, so that the natural rights are basically superseding the Constitution. So that's why it's in that order. So you have the natural rights that ultimately matter. Then you have the Constitution, and then of course you have the gun control of hey, even if it said it was okay to have gun control, it doesn't work, so just kind of breaking it down from there. But yeah.
All right. So before we get too far into, you started this not as like a college thesis or a doctorate dissertation kind of thing. This was well, you can't really call it grassroots. It's you yourself. But
yeah.
All right. So
it was almost how, like we're kind of talking about beforehand, like what could you do as just a person to kind of get to people that don't know, and it's like, well, that kind of made sense to me, where, hey, you're going to be stuck in this concealed carry class, so I'm going to pitch my little, I'm going to do my sales pitch on why gun control's dumb and why self-defense matters. And so it was kind of that, and then just kind of grew. I think when I did the pamphlet, I was like, you know what, I had this pie in the sky kind of dumb idea where I could always just link to that little pamphlet. If somebody was trying to make an argument, I could be like, well, it's this, and then I would just send the link or something. But then it just got too big.
It just got too big. Yeah. I mean, the internet has affected gun culture just like it has affected anything else. And yes, I do occasionally laugh at your memes. So there's your daily dose of nepotism. But all right. So like, oftentimes we see, I think, within like works where we can at least disregard the concern about having like an authority fallacy right now. This isn't like this is your body of research that took years, some time to compile. And I mean, just by the writing style, you make a statement and then you quote somebody and then you make a statement and then you quote somebody. It's very much so. I get the impression of like, I don't need to say this again. It's already been said, whether it's Cicero or Jefferson or somebody, or some other character who's already made this statement. I would agree with you there. I kind of got, I took it a bit refreshingly in the sense of when you see people teaching classes. I come from a military background, and let's just use the current or the descending zeitgeist of CQB. It's kind of in its afternoon. It's in its later years of being the center point. You'll encounter instructors who spend much more time trying to say sound smart and present this idea than actually teaching it. And this is a nuanced criticism. This isn't that like they're garbage people and they don't know what they're doing. It's just everyone, you see it, when you see it, where this guy's trying to like describe a thing differently because not everyone learns the same. Whereas in your work, you're not just trying to say the same thing that somebody else has said, and it's not quite a citation. It's more like a block of text. And so I get, so that came about by format though, because you were doing this kind of PowerPoint presentation,
right?
Or was that okay? That was how.
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of both that. Like in one way, we kind of talk about like a logical fallacy of appealing to authority. I'm not really trying to appeal to authority, but I certainly have. I guess I would say, no one's like, oh, well, I definitely need to believe this because Josh Baker said so, and he made a funny meme, so I definitely should trust this guy. It's like, no, let me put this in order, and then you can go back and you can look and you can say, oh, well, George Mason said this, or James Madison said this, or Cicero said this. It's like, no, these are legitimate people. That this is, and also, like I like reading older people because it's kind of like, look, this is nothing new. These ideas have been out there. This is very simple. We've already debated this over and over and over. This is clear. This is concise. That these statements have been made. So, but yeah, and also they word it so much better.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate, except for with the exception of that one time in like English and European literature where a sentence was 7 pages long and that was normal. Like, okay, dude, I know you like to use the comma, but we got to you got to more this. But it is funny because it's just like I'm reading this book and this is like a 3-page sentence. Jeez, man. However, they wrote and thought differently than we do now. So,
Mhm.
key point there. This is a timeless idea. This has been around. A number of shows back, we had Isaac Botkin on, and he was talking about, or we started talking about the ideas that came about during the Enlightenment and even a little bit before that, that sort of produced the Second Amendment. And that was, again, more of a historical tracing on, like, this is an old hat conversation. But one of the kind of topics and questions that I had for you being said is, you're making an argument. You make an argument here that this is not a new conversation. You said it just a minute ago. And so one way of saying, like, the gun control, gun rights, human rights debate is not a new conversation. In fact, in it being timeless, do you think, I think that with each sort of revolution of it, there's this attempt to, like, say something in stone so that no one has to talk about it again. And inevitably, with enough time, we end up back talking about it
Right.
again. And I had a thought of, like, well, is this kind of a problem of it being there is nothing new under the sun, but the diligent work of the individual is re-engaging in it so that, well, I mean, I'm not 1,000 years old, so I have to keep learning things because I forget things, but also, if I have kids and when they'll have to learn too, and so generations roll by. How do you address the idea that while we're dealing with both an old concept, we're also dealing with, like, new issues? Because a lot of gun control seems to be focused on modern technology, and it's going to change, and we can become more lethal, and we can become, more very quickly degrade into these sort of childish arguments, like you wouldn't want everyone to have a nuclear bomb kind of thing. And it's like, it's not an argument. It's just a thing that you say to make you feel good. And how would you address the issue of, like, the timelessness of the right to self-defense?
Yeah, I think partly it's we take it for granted that the next, like, we settled it in our minds, so the next generation knows. Like, I remember one time, I can't remember what I was talking about it with my dad one time. I forget what I was explaining, but he's like, you got to remember that not everybody's read the same books as you. And so I kind of think about it with this. So we take for granted sometimes when we say something that maybe that next person doesn't know what the random book that you read to get you to your position in anything. It could be theology, philosophy, whatever. Maybe you read something that stuck with you and you learned from that, and then you're trying to explain it to the next generation as this, one sentence, but you read 17 books on the topic. So I don't think we do a great job of passing down kind of our knowledge and our reason and stuff like that for it. So I think that's partly it, that I think we should do a better job at passing it down and explaining the why. But I think as far as those, like, you have those arguments where, oh, it's getting more lethal and all this kind of stuff. It really is. It's like, do you really think that when those people say that kind of stuff, like the founders never meant this or they never meant that, the founders were pretty brilliant. And they were very smart. I mean, they didn't have TikTok, so they actually were able to, like, read and do actual important stuff. But these guys were, like, scientists and philosophers, and, like, they were well read. They were very smart. And so I don't think that they were like, oh yeah, we're going to say this, but if it gets any more deadly or anything like that, there's plenty of evidence that they knew what these weapons were capable of. But it's even more evident that they knew what governments were capable of and why the people needed to have this ability for self-defense. So I think, as far as on that one side, I think we don't do a good enough job of passing it down, like, the information. And on the other side, I just think that people take it for granted that we think we're more intelligent than what we are. We think that, oh, since we have an iPhone, we're now smarter. That doesn't mean you're any more smarter that we can make an iPhone than they couldn't. They were, I think they were very well-learned people. Yes, I always think that's such a weak argument that the founders meant, or yeah, but it couldn't happen in this day and age because they didn't know how rapid an AR-15 could shoot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
whatever.
it sort of has like this. You have a rights-based argument on one side, which is it's a human right. This is where we grounded it in being a human right. Like, it would be an infringement on an individual's right if one group of people got into a room and said some things and then decided that by some reason, whether it was the divine right of kings or even that they were sort of elected, which raises another question, because that kind of was what the point of election was, to one of the utility parts of the concept of elections is that you can then say with more certainty than the concept of the divine right of kings that what the legislature chooses to do and make legal and observe and protect is done on behalf of the people. Which, I mean, you could try to take the anarchist route and say, well, no one can represent me, and like, we'll get into political philosophy, especially in regards to like our anarchism and libertarianism later. But you have this rights-based argument on one side. You're an individual, you're a human being. Because you're a human being, you have a human right to self. One of those is a human right to self-defense, which is tied to life, liberty, and property, and sort of it moves on there. And then the other side of the argument, which is, this is, even by laying it out, it comes across, I might be considered representing it poorly, but it's a utilitarian argument of like, well, if we make this illegal, less people will die, or less people will do crime, or there's some sort of generic good, like, well, if we had banned guns, my child would still be alive, or something like that. And that's a utilitarian argument being placed against a rights-based argument, which then in any unfortunate debate would make them both moot. They don't engage on the same ground at all, unless the rights-based argument would have to supersede the utility argument and say, well, even if it was true that your statistic would produce that outcome, it doesn't make it moral that you would effectively enslave everybody to a legislation via stripping them of any form of self-defense. And so I get it in the sense of like the difficulty of arguments, and I think we have to take a little bit of maybe humility in recognizing that time does change and erode at the beliefs that we hold as a culture, at least. And gun culture itself, for the last 60 odd years, has not represented itself. Well, maybe it has represented itself well, but it's not. It needs to continue to grow. Like, needs to continue to change. And why I was asking this question is, like, we can talk about how the concept of rights is a long-standing argument over thousands of years, at least in the Western tradition. Is there anything new that we could come up with that you could think of that would sort of settle the next element of the question when it comes to gun control and individual rights, or would you make the argument that the only option is to go to the past and say that's authoritative?
Man, I don't know, because I think so much now, like, there's just no. That's what I was gonna say. There's no silver bullet. That was actually the working title of this book. That was one of the titles. I was like, the silver bullet, because it was supposed to be like a one stop, But I don't think there is that silver bullet or that perfect argument. I think I wrote it in here. I think so much of it comes down to somebody's worldview and their presuppositions, and so what triggers one person is not going to be the same thing that triggers another person. But
Can I interrupt you right there?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So worldview is a term that I grew up in my household. But I've come to discover, unfortunately, that there are many people that are our peers in life that have never heard that term before or had any meaningful understanding of it. And when I think of worldview, I think of metaphysics as in like, what is reality and what do I understand as reality? But how would you describe worldview? Because I think this is a good time to put it in.
Yeah, I guess maybe to put it easy, like we're Westerners, so we're going to have that. We're of course going to have the natural law idea. We're going to have our. I'm trying to think of commonalities. For instance, we had guns when I grew up, so of course I'm more comfortable around guns. So I'm trying to think of a best way to explain worldview. I think a lot of it just has to do with your upbringing, what you've been affected with in your life, how things have impacted you. Basically, I just think of it as your story before you got here. What got you to this point? So if you're having, let's say, if I were to talk to somebody who had been, let's say, a parent of Parkland shooting, or they're going to have a completely different belief system. When I'm talking about natural rights and natural laws, that's going in one ear and out the other because of what their prior beliefs are, or what has impacted them prior in life is going to be so much different than what has impacted me. Our worldview is different because we've both been in the military, but even our worldviews are going to be different because I was Air Force. You're going to have a lot of different. What's your history? What's your background? That kind of thing.
So how would you differentiate?
That's how I usually say it.
Yeah, how would you differentiate a worldview from a perspective, or would you not? Or are you saying they're functionally the same thing?
And I'd say they're pretty much the same thing. That's probably, for some reason, I think perspective is being something so much smaller than what your worldview is. Like, I just think like, oh, we have a different perspective. It's just like a little thing where I think of a worldview as like is much more ingrained than just a small perspective.
Okay.
I think it's easier to change somebody's perspective than it would be to change their whole worldview.
So
I guess that's how I see it.
A difference in worldview would be one easy example of a difference in worldview would be like a religious person versus a person of one religion versus a person of another. That would,
exactly, yeah,
because you have your presuppositions, as in like, well, you're presupposing something. In some ways, you're basically approaching an argument on a foundation of assumptions. Not necessarily and that doesn't necessarily destroy the argument or make it less cogent. It definitely though is like, in order for me to, how do I? There are ways to explain it now, and I've definitely wanted to go into a series on this subject. But like, I think of a worldview like your worldview is what how you conceptualize the existing world, morality, knowledge. What do you think is true? What do you think is good? What do you think is, not what do you like, but what do you think is good? Like, it is good that man provides for his family. It is, and I believe it is good because of this reason. And so like, much of when we talk about introspection, and I think I grew up in the era where a lot of introspection was in the joke of like the anime world, feeling bad about your bad decisions. A lot of introspection is really addressing what do you believe that is actually true, not simply how do I argue this better. And so some people, I've encountered people, and it doesn't matter, but like, oh, it does, otherwise I wouldn't be saying it, that we have encountered people who don't understand that different people have different worldviews. And that has had to be, at some point in time, that should have been introduced to them, but now it's being introduced to them as an adult. And so like a political philosophy is one thing, but a worldview is much, much deeper. So going back to what you're saying about the worldviews regarding the right to self-defense, is it? When I'm reading your book, you're making an argument that you're trying to actually build a worldview. You're trying to explain and build a worldview based on not only the historical nature of the Second Amendment, or the idea of the right to self-defense, which is much as we want to be critical to ourselves, it's kind of ridiculous how bad we are at talking about it. And I'm hoping that we can keep getting better at. Well, we have to keep getting better at it. It's probably the only short answer. So going back to the timeless thing, we can go back and I'm getting from your book, we can go back in history and gain more information and better experiences. But then when it comes to new things, if you were to sit back and say, if you were to be asked in a single, and you're not in a single sentence, but if you were to be asked, what is the right to self-defense, and what is it grounded in, or what is your argument for what is the most convincing argument to you, not to somebody else, but to you?
Oh, the most compelling argument for self-defense? It's probably the dumbest thing ever. I think of it as, it's going to sound stupid, but so we used to have these arguments. I was a firefighter in the Air Force, and so we used to have these dumb arguments about if you were naked and you go out in the woods, what animal could you actually kill? And it was just one of the dumbest, stupid thing that guys do, And you're like, man, could you take a ram? Could you choke out a ram? Like, and it was basically saying that, like, dude, we don't have humans. We're not very good. Like, other animals have much better weapons on them. They have horns, they have antlers, they have claws. The humans don't. We have brains, and so what we use tools. And so that is so I think of it as nature. I think of when I see an animal, they have claws, they have teeth, they have antlers, they are ingrained by creator, designer, whatever you want to say it, nature, whatever. They have been designed that, hey, this is what they need for defense, and this is what they've been equipped with. Humans, it's like, dang, you guys are going to need some tools. And so I think of that. I think something as dumb as that, where what we've been given brains to create tools, and that we have the right to preserve ourselves and our lives, just like any other animal does, just like anything else. But we're able to preserve ourselves and our property and our families, and we're able to do that. And it's just probably one of the most basic things in nature. That's why I'm not a pacifist or anything like that. If you look at the animal kingdom, even mostly plants and everything else, they have defenses. They have abilities to defend themselves. Animals aren't pacifists. So I think of it as dumb as that, just as much, such a basic concept of just looking at creation, looking at the world around us and going, yeah, this is clearly encoded that we have defense. We have a right to self-defense, just like anything else. So yeah, I think it's dumb and elementary, but yeah.
In one way, it's nowhere in nature do you find something that, well, I mean, you definitely can say there's prey or ineffective things, but everywhere in nature, everything is striving to continue existing to some extent.
Right. They have some sort of defense.
Okay. When we think of defense on a natural term, we're thinking about predator and prey. But we don't condemn the lion for eating the antelope. It's not like the lion goes to court and has to argue the justification for his choices. We just say, well, that's what lions do. It's back to the parable that's come up a number of times lately, not on the show, but in colloquial language about the scorpion and the frog. The frog wants to. There's a river. Frog approaches the river, and the scorpion's like, oh, let me ride on your back and we'll both cross the river. And the frog's like, but you'll sting me. And then the scorpion goes, no, I won't. And then halfway through, of course, the scorpion stings him and then they're paralyzed. And so they're both going to drown. And the frog is like, why did you sting me? And the scorpion goes, I'm a scorpion. It's what I do, and like,
Yeah.
And so like we say this with the instinct of animals is we don't judge them morally when they kill each other, for lack of better words. But when people do, that's a very different story. When a bunch of orangutans, which are, which is so often brought up as like the closest human. Right. I also believe in Christianity. I believe that the world was created, but even in nature, the closest thing that we see to much of human existence would still be the orangutan. And even when an orangutan kills another orangutan, it's not like they argue whether it was justified. It's just whatever the outcome is. And so you and I, though, when we're talking about rights, we're talking about something different. And so when we have tools, our concept of self-defense is not the same as, well, maybe I'm saying, I'm making the assumption. Are you arguing that our defense, how does that play out? That our concept of self-defense, since we don't have claws and scales and giant fangs, we have to use tools, but our concept of self-defense, especially between human beings, is very different. Because it's compelling to say that, well, I have a gun so that I don't get mauled by a bear, but I, quite frankly, am not worried about being mauled by a bear where I live. So then what? Because you get where I'm going there?
I'm more or less just saying that, we have that right of creating our self-defense, or like we have the right to use that, not necessarily the right to inflict harm that isn't like, I guess I'd say maybe the right to offense like that, but the right to a defense. How would I put that?
I find it a difficult argument, or I don't find it a difficult argument. I find it as like a distinction, as in I can see in nature that nature always defends its own life, but I don't see morality in nature. A lion does what a lion does, a gazelle does what a gazelle does, but when a person does what a person does, like become a meth addict, or or builds a successful business, or causes harm to somebody, like beats his wife or something, like those are things that I evaluate a human being based on moral decisions. And so, and that morality is informed by my worldview. But then then self-defense, when it comes between people, I think is a little bit different because intent becomes involved.
Yeah, I definitely think that once you I do agree with that. That you have that it does come down to it does come back down to worldview, and because you see that with on social media where people they give that up, and they're like, well, if I'd rather, I can't believe some people would say this, but they're like, oh, I'd rather be raped than take another life, and you're like, why? I don't understand that mentality, but I don't understand the mentality of a lot of people who would create themselves to be victims or make themselves victims. And I don't think they think of it like that either. So I know it does come down to some type of worldview.
There can be a moral conviction for pacifism, and I think that's perfectly acceptable, but you just don't be a liar and export that responsibility of violence to somebody else.
And I always think that it's sometimes, especially just with the social media age, because you're just seeing people have, 280 characters on Twitter or small captions, and most of us don't read the full captions anyway on social media. I know I've been misunderstood a million times it's like, no, I can't make the whole statement in 140 characters or whatever. But you see people, they'll make their case, and we always just want to argue so much that like we want to make them out to be villains, or and I do it too a lot. I mean, I always think people are just complete idiots, or but it's like sometimes I have to take a step back and realize that like they have their own worldview, they have their own presuppositions, they have. I think the majority, I'll even say the majority of anti-gunners, the majority of Moms Demand Actions and those Everytown people, I think the majority of them have good intentions. I think that they really are. I think I think they see that utilitarian argument that they see what they're doing as a good thing. We see it as a malicious and they're ignorant, or we see them as, oh, they're trying to take our guns because they want to do something bad or something like that. And certainly the case can be made for useful idiots, but I think that for the most part, I even say that the majority of the anti-gun politicians, I think we put those motives on them that they're bad people, and I certainly do, but I certainly think that, but I don't think the majority of them actually are. I think that I do think that from their moral sides that they are trying to prevent loss of life. They just don't know anything. They take a lot of things for granted, I guess I should say.
Okay, so when it comes to, I'm actually gonna preface this and ask you to convince me of something, or try to open that door, because I'm a bit, maybe let's just call it black-pilled on the subject. Sure. I am of the opinion that people who support gun control and support the erasure and stripping of another person's rights for no reason other than their own comfort do not have good intentions. I don't think that they're planning the next great atrocity, but I don't believe that kind of a thing is that a belief like that can come about through simple ignorance. In other words, I'm of the opinion that the support of gun control always comes from a position of malice, and that malice is what informs the ignorance. If you desired something else, right? Or I'm sorry, not right. I just made that even worse.
Yeah.
So when that has been for a while, for some time, my opinion on the subject is that it's not about convincing arguments anymore. It's really about winning a game. Maybe is a harder way of saying it. As in, there are some people who can be convinced, and I would much rather engage in the battleground of ideas than I would engage in an actual violent encounter. I would much rather have a debate with you than have to fight you. And I would much rather have a culture war than a civil war. Let's just say. In a culture war is, I mean, like the 70s, 80s kind of era, or the not 80s. I think it was like early the 90s. Wasn't it the 90s when the term culture war started rolling around? But it doesn't matter. The idea of this culture war, of like this conflict within culture between ideas and beliefs and worldviews. So, but I'm of the opinion that it's not an issue of information. It's that there's something else that's stopping the person, because if it was information, we would never be having this conversation. The information, you have one book. If you can explain it in one book, that's one book. And if you can't get it, you can't get the idea that you as an individual do not have, or it is immoral for you as the individual to go to somebody else, whether by legislation or by emotion or by whatever, to strip somebody else of a right which is theirs on virtue of them being human. That cannot come out of simple ignorance. It must come out of immorality. Now, you're making an argument that there are people who have good intentions. How would you convince somebody like me, if I'm going to exaggerate my black-pilledness and say there are no good gun control advocates, only tyrants? How would you convince me? What's an argument?
Yeah, and I would say for a lot of times I will be I'm black-pilled on it, and I'll be like, all these people are just vindictive, horrible people. And then I try to take a step back and go, maybe there's something else. But I'd say, the key in sales is having an emotion, selling emotion. I used to sell cars too. And so you'd always say like, oh man, we got to get them while they're under the ether. You have to appeal to their emotions, because otherwise it won't make sense. And I think a lot of times you see that, and that's why politicians hit on it so hard when one of these attacks happen. They hit right to emotions because emotions work better than facts. And so I almost think of it kind of like a cult.
Ben Shapiro doesn't like you. I'm making a joke. Yeah.
But you just have like kind of that. I think of like a cult where I think you have that cult leader who that is the bad one. That's the bad person. Maybe a few people right underneath them. That's the bad person. And then they made emotional, maybe presented some evidence, even if it wasn't good. They presented some evidence that convinced these people. Were the people good or bad for believing him? I mean, were they were ignorant, to that, were they useful idiots to do their bidding? Yeah, but were they evil in their intent? So I kind of think of it like that when it comes to that. Now, granted, I don't have any positive things to say to them about them trying to take my rights, but I'm just I try to look at them as actual, like, they're not just, they're not rubbing their hands going, as soon as we take these guns, that's when I'm going to get them. I don't think that's for the majority. I don't think that
I would agree there. Maybe it's the misrepresentation that it could be misrepresentation. Like they're not planning some sort of diabolical move that can only happen when you give up your guns or whatever. I would agree with that.
Yeah, or you could. A few days ago, I posted this to go off on a weird side trip, but we don't not go too far. But I posted this thing, but it kind of pertains to it on one of my other pages, and it was about that 90-something-year-old typist. She was a typist, I think, in Auschwitz, or she was at least a typist for some Nazi regime. I think she was 17 or 18 at the time, whatever. But they had just charged her for being a Nazi. And people were quick to say, nope, she was a Nazi, she's an evil person. And it's just kind of like, she was a 17-year-old typist. Do you really think she was... How much do you think she had to do with it? Was she an actual evil person, or was 99% of the population technically Nazis or whatever? I mean, it's just kind of it's a hard argument. I mean, to figure out what somebody's actual morals are, or what they believe, or what their intent is. That's a tough one. So I kind of compare it to the same thing with a Moms Demand Action, or in Every Town, or I call them ASDMs in the book, the anti-self-defense movement.
Yep.
The ASDMs. It sucks because there's a part of my brain that I want to be black-pilled, and I want to say, these are evil people. This is the enemy. They're bad. But then I try to take a step back, and I've only recently tried to do this. Try to recently take a step back and be like, these are people who probably have. Like, look, I think that's a big fundamental difference of what people think. We both, the gun community and the anti-gun community, both want to decrease the amount of people that die. We're both kind of have that same goal. One just it's just a completely different way of looking at things, of what we believe, of how we can achieve it.
All right. So in between a pro-gun and an anti-pro, or an anti-self-defense position, you're saying that you believe that both sides want to reduce violence, or majority speaking, there's some sort of end goal, whereas your opponent, if you were in a debate like that, would not say that. I mean, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, it's not a good representation of the population. But if you go to the Twitter level of an argument, they just think you want everyone to die.
Exactly right. Yeah,
right.
I definitely think that.
Yeah. So okay. So you're already on uneven ground, because you're giving them intellectual charity and they're not giving you anything. They think that you only have malice intent, and whereas you're approaching the argument saying, no, I think we both want something good. Okay, well, I think that I don't think that I struggle with that. I struggle with that a lot because I don't think we have the same outcomes in mind. Sure, one of those symptoms of that outcome might be less violence. Sure, I could give you the benefit of the doubt, but I want freedom. You don't. You want the opposite of freedom. You want safety. That's giving it the most charity that I can. That's giving it the most charity that I can. I want freedom. You want slavery. You want no one to have will outside of your control. Because the possession of a firearm is the expression of an individual's will, in the extent that you can see this. No, you don't need to go very far. This is not a stretch of a term, whatever, but we have millions of guns in the United States and so little violence that you cannot possibly, in good faith, make the argument that the possession of an item is the sole element necessary for depicting desire. If you took a population of 1,000 people and one of them had a gun, but all of them didn't, you could ask yourself the question, well, why does he have that? Is there intent involved? But the fact that we have so many in our population, there's no argument that I don't think the argument of possession as an implication of will is is correct. I'm sorry.
Right, especially when you're looking at the states with like a New Hampshire or Wyoming or really most of New England, we lax gun laws, yet we have, yet they have lower homicides than Canada and Australia and all that kind of stuff, and less suicides than Japan and China. But yeah, and I think as far as I do think I'm giving them more credit, and I don't want it to sound like it's a compromise, because I think that's where the gun community went wrong for so long, is just doing a compromise. And I think it really kind of pertains to how much, I don't want to say compassion, but how much just say grace, how much grace you're giving them, as far as like, look, if you're debating the blue-haired Portlandier, then yeah, I'm probably thinking that these are actual, like, they're much more, they have a whole agenda behind their whole idea. But if you're talking to your aunt on Thanksgiving, or you're talking to a normal person at your office, I don't think that person is the vindictive gun grabber who, is going to is pushing cultural Marxism or some other kind of thing. Like, I think that I think it would be all, as far as the debate goes, I think I would want to know what that person is like. And I certainly wouldn't go, hey, we're all here for the same thing. But I'd just try to look at them that way, where they're not just an evil person.
Okay,
and
so
it's a hard balance, but
yeah, so like it's difficult to approach, but I think what our generation is being forced to do is to become much more keen in understanding in approaching conversations from whether or not our interlocutor is disingenuous or not. Like, there are some people that I just won't debate. Why? Well, I mean, I'm not like a debater by trade. Maybe by whatever, if that's a trade, whatever. We don't do that as much unless you're like in a club or whatever. But maybe the American concept of like, we go to school and we learn how to learn things and then we debate them in public. Like, we don't debate in public. We just slander each other nonstop.
right.
Like, whoever can out slander the other one tends to like hold, and then we go to the polls and like, you're an evil man, I'm gonna vote for the other guy. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I think a lot, whether it's in academics or in culture, people are becoming a little bit more keen to the idea of going and assessing who they're talking to more consciously, beyond just their aesthetic choices and their temperament and whatever, to you're not here to have to be able to determine whether or not the person that I'm talking to is actually there honestly or not. Because I think that has a huge part to play now. I think there's
that's the biggest thing on social media is like, is that person a real person? Should I give this person any time? You know, especially on Twitter, there's so many bots and stuff like that. So you kind of, I think about that one debating is like, why give this person the time of day? I try to judge it by like, what is the person asking? Is that person asking something? One, is it like an original thought? Like, is it just the most canned thing? Like, oh, well, statistics show that you're more likely to kill a family member or something. It's like, well, you just regurgitating a lie. That's not what that stat says. But or is it like somebody that's actually having a real thought? You know, and so if somebody's actually having a real thought, then I consider them to be a real person, and then sometimes I'll engage with them. But
well, like I'll admit at times it's hard to believe that somebody like David Hogg is a real person, not just like a created entity out of a think tank. Like sometimes you'll see like this statement being made, and yet and yet you go out into the world and people believe stuff. They believe things that you're like, there's no way anyone would believe that, but they completely do, or they live in contradiction, or we're trying to like assess something and it doesn't work. But there's certainly a challenge to that, and I think so much of gun culture's posturing has been this defensive posture, as if we're trying to convince somebody to like not infringe anymore on us, and this is reflected in politics by the supposed only side that supports the right to bear arms also not doing that very often, and us being forced into like massive not being forced, us as individuals being encouraged to engage in or satisfy the holes in our beliefs with massive assumptions and generalizations. Like the Republican Party is not interested in your rights, or the Democratic Party is not interested in your rights. It's like it's a party. It doesn't. It's an apparatus. It's not a good. I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, but I'm finding it frustrating that it's like I'll say something, you'll believe something, you'll have this idea in your head that says something like, the Republican Party just wants to take away women's rights, and it's like, okay, that's not a real person statement. That's not something an intelligent person says.
Right.
But yet at the same time, we could also make an argument that the Democratic Party is interested in taking away your human right to possess a firearm, and time again we see it, and maybe those two arguments equivalent or separate? So, are they functionally equivalent arguments? Could you do so? Could you make that argument? I think the answer is unfortunately yes. I think
definitely when you see the majority of them, when you see like, is there a no, he just did the one guy from West Virginia, forget his name off the top of my head. I think he signed on for that assault weapons ban too, or whatever, that new assault weapons bill. But for the most part, what Democrat is pro-gun? No, he's a Dem from West Virginia. He starts with an M. Yeah, I can't think of his name.
Yeah,
whatever. Anyway, but it's like, you used to have them where you'd have Dems that were probably more pro-gun than the Republicans. I mean, especially like JFK's day, I talk about it a little bit, where that was where all of the gun manufacturers were in New England. So you have Massachusetts senators, Connecticut senators, stuff like that, New York senators who were really pro-gun, because that's who they were getting their money from. That's where the power was. But now, man, shoot, I haven't seen a pro-gun Dem in years. But
yeah, well,
at least at the national level.
I mean, I think we can improve our language to the idea of like pro-gun. It's like, well, no one's really pro-gun, and it's just this becomes like a petty marketing argument. So I don't want to get engaged too far in it, but it's like, well, no, I just, the right to bear arms is a human right. Anything other, like that's what it is. We're not talking about the right of guns or the right of people to own guns. It's simply you are a human and may defend your life, or you are not. That is it. I either have ownership over your existence, or you have the right to defend yourself, and I think that's a rather important distinction that gets kind of lost in the mix. So, I have. So if you were to say, like, when you wrote your book, you had a goal, and we're looking at, cultures changing, and we're looking at gun culture changing. What is one element? What is something that you want to see change in gun culture? Like, what is something that you want to see, whether it's somebody who, because I mean, I've been in gun culture for 10 years, 12 years, whatever, for however how long I've been in this world, and I'm just reading your book now. What is what do you want for an outcome?
I think I want the gun community to be equipped to answer questions, and know their history, and not just have the dumb canned answers that we've been using forever. Actually have something with some meat on it, but then actually take that and do something with it. When you look at I guess I'll say it as the left. The left was, or yeah, the left is probably the best way to say it. They were so active in school boards and active in their local communities, and they were able to assemble so much better. But if you look at some of these people who have risen to power that are senators and Congress people, they were just school board members. That's how they started. And they started so small, and it's like, I wish I saw a lot more of that with the gun community, that they would be knowledgeable in that, but then go do something with it and get involved. I think for so long we've just considered that, well, the Second Amendment is there, so our rights are protected. We don't have to do anything, and that's what we've done. Nothing. We took for granted. We thought that the NRA was going to be the one to back us, but if you look at, like, that most recent hearing in Illinois, there was NRA and there was Moms Demand Action. You didn't see any NRA members in the crowd. You just saw a sea of red shirts for Moms Demand Action. And it's like, well, that was probably plants, but it's like, but would any of the gun community shown up? And
you're not a
been in the background.
You're not a person. You're a house plant.
Yeah.
I am guilty of occasionally referring to people as vegetables, which is probably not.
Yeah.
Like, you're not a mind. You're a meme, dude. Like, you're not. That's just, it's my own head. But so, okay. So you look at this event, there's this conversation ish going on like the political scale between, at this time, the NRA and Moms Demand Action, and who shows up to support their people. It certainly isn't the NRA. And this was recently, like, we're talking this year, because I'm not sure.
Oh, this was like, what, 2 weeks ago? I think I might have had a clip of the video. I think I had a clip of the video on my Instagram. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. They were doing their I think it was their assault weapon ban. Now, the NRA guy, which I thought was hilarious, is that he had the right answer. Like, I was like, man, this guy might have read my book. But like, he had the right answer to the question. They asked if the Second Amendment was that an individual right? Where does it say that it's an individual right? And the guy was like, where does the same one that says that the First and the Third Amendment and it's we don't consider that, we know that they're all individual rights. And the representative was like, no, or she was stupid. But it's so funny because the NRA guy looked like he was just wearing overalls, and then was like, oh, I got to wear a suit today. I mean, he just looked so blue collar. It was great. But he knew he was an old guy, but he knew that answer, and I was shocked that he just pulled that right away, that he knew that answer. But yeah, it was just recently, but it just seemed incredible that you had these NRA guys and this other lawyer, and they're basically alone, because you look in the back and it's just all those Moms Demand Action people. They're always wearing their red shirts, and I think that symbolizes something. You always see all those red shirts, and it shows when you see that picture. Look at all the people who are for gun control. When you look at that picture, you see that. And you never get to, you know, I'm not saying we all need our same shirts, but you don't see anybody show up for us, which is kind of crazy.
Well, no, and it's sometimes you could make the kind of old but generic, and I don't think it sticks. I don't think it's a good argument, but you can make the old argument that, well, it's because all the conservatives are out working. You know what I mean? Like it's such a bad argument. I mean, it's such a goofy argument, but it's also kind of funny. And I've made it myself. Like when I say it's such a bad argument, chances are at some point in time I would have probably said something like that. And like I think like one thing that I want to see keep coming out of gun culture and growing up is that, like, you know what, dude, we all went through some pretty weird phases. Like I mean, not everyone, but like, you know, like I remember my first handgun. I literally bought a 45 because I thought the 9mm wasn't well, you didn't have stopping power, and it was like now that I'm at where I'm at, I'm like, oh man, dude, that was not a good argument, but at the same time, you're like, well, I'm glad I grew out of it. You know, whereas like we can oftentimes, and I don't mean it to be like derogatory, but we can oftentimes look at people and go, you know, like, you'll figure it out, dude. It's and I have to make that assessment with people being like, either that person will figure it out or they won't. And there's definitely, you know, people who are like, okay, well, thanks. You know, like I don't have anything to say to you, man. You know, you think about like
the hardest thing, yeah, because and I think social media has made that so much worse because you have a history, you know, your history's online of, you know, like your bad gun purchase or your bad like thought or your bad theory or your bad philosophy or, you know, whatever you had. And like, I mean, shoot, I started on social media in I think 2014, 2015 on Instagram. I mean, I've lost a million channels, which is probably great because it erased all my dumb ideas. But you know, if the people who've been around the whole time, it's probably, you'll see some people be like, well, that's not what you believed, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, because I grew. Like, you know, you can learn, you can grow. And yeah, sometimes I worry, like, I used to make fun of a lot more people. And partially, you know, like we're both military. In it, you make fun of people just because, like, it's not, you're not even being vindictive. You just make fun of people and it's a joke, whatever. But then you find out that people actually like take it hard. Or I really stopped criticizing a lot of people because I was like, shoot, I was dumb once and I've moved on and I've changed, and I don't want somebody to not be part of the community in a way, or take it the wrong way, even though sometimes I really want to make fun of other people. But
yeah, like this isn't like this isn't like a we all need to kiss and make better kind of thing. But like,
yeah,
I think some people, I think what we're seeing in the culture as it's maturing is a pretty, like, some people are getting pretty keen to like, oh, this is a troll, don't let it bother me.
right.
Like, this is a troll. You're like, okay, dude, like, you can't take every argument that you have on Instagram seriously or on social media seriously. It's unfortunate because we want to talk to each other. Like, that is part of why you and I are here, is because we want to have conversations about the meaningful things. Like, the Second Amendment, in some sense, is a very defensive concept. I have the right to self-defense. It's baked into the cake. But I have to actively talk about the subject and essentially promote it, or it'll go away. And it is well, will it go away? No, it will be infringed upon, I guess. So, like, it's a value. It's a moral value that I want to pass it on to my children. I want to pass it on to my friends. I want to encourage my father in the subject, or talk to people like that. But I also need to be able to defend it against other people. And so, and defend it against other arguments. And so, like, I too would like to see the next generation of gun culture be so much more articulate in their speech and accurate in their arguments. And this isn't a criticism that we're all, you know, everything before me was stupid and everything after me is because of me. It is a recognition of like, hey, we could do that better. We could think better about what we're doing. I think within gun culture, if we knew the right things, we would do more of the right things. And that is not the same outside of gun culture. I think there are people who, no matter how much information they were given, will still believe what they want to believe. And that's fine, in the sense of that's what they're going to do. And so it's our choice we have to choose to how we're going to navigate it. But, like I want to see, I think I want to see, essentially gun culture maturing in that sense. So,
yeah. And I think the 20th century is just I think it was a weird time. We all love making fun of FUDs, and but they, I in the book I always go back and I try to make those old statements and stuff like that. But I think in that 20th century, they obviously had most of that, but they didn't have the NRA, arguing the NFA in 1934. They couldn't go back and say, well, hey, remember when you guys did this and we compromised on this and we compromised on this and we compromised on this, and look at what you've done. The NRA didn't have that. So sometimes we look at stuff under, like, oh, why didn't they argue harder and why didn't they do this? I think at the time that they thought that they were gonna compromise this little bit, and then they weren't gonna compromise anymore, and then they were done, and they didn't need, like, oh, that's good, we're all done. We just compromised a little bit, and then they did it again in the 60s. Then they did it again a little bit more in the 60s. Then they did a little bit more, and it just kind of that they kept on compromising and stuff like that. But I think about that too. It's just like when we have what we learned and stuff, and I just think that the gun culture is so different nowadays, and I think partly I do want to attribute that to a lot of post 9/11 GIs. You had that. It's like we imported this huge gun culture just from veterans that thought guns were cool, and so it's just weird how the gun culture has changed so much. I can just think about the number of AR-15s and rifles and that we have now that we didn't have 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we've grown so much.
No, I mean absolutely. Like I have a suppressed AR-15, in my house, like that. I have that is way, way better than the one that I carried overseas. I mean, it's just laser tuned, and I've worked all the bugs out over the last couple of years, and I'm almost kind of at the point where, like, I don't need to change anything, not for a while at least. I mean, the only thing I want to do is get a better laser, like, okay, but it's not like, I'll change it around a couple times, but I definitely feel like I know where I'm going to be at this. I'm going to be at this stage of that tool for a while, and then when I change it, it'll be for, my reasoning will be very situational, and I don't know what that situation is, but like maybe I'll get another one and I'll put an LPVO on it because I want one with an LPVO on it, or I'll figure something else out like that. So
right. Yeah.
But that's for my place that, like, I have to recognize that, like, I also have been around long enough that I've kind of been able to iron out all those kinks. Like, at one point in time when I started shooting 3-gun, the AR-15 that I purchased for that was a Warsport LVOA, which was like the meme gun at the time, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And did it perform really well? Absolutely. But now I haven't shot it in probably 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's just, it sits over there in its case away from everything, and, or in this, in the safe or whatever. And so, like, we go through changes in our opinions for sure, but now I'm definitely not so much in like a plateau, but I'm seeing my attention change from like the stuff and things to the doing. And I think I believe I see that happening in gun culture quite a bit, where it's less of a race to try to get the stuff. I mean, we definitely want to get more things like better night vision and more, better plate carriers and stuff like that. And it's a never ending race, but we're getting better at defining our goals. So I'm going to Jen Psaki and circle us back to the question of, like, as we see gun culture becoming more intellectual, I recently discovered the term FUDlore, and I think it's funny. What is one thing that you want to see? what does winning look like in gun culture? And I'll go first. I want to see gun culture going on the offense when it comes to rights. As in, we want to, in legal and moral terms, make it not make it, but I want to see gun culture go after infringements and start getting like that's an infringement. You can't do that anymore. That's that what I'm saying. Like an example would be like SBRs, where gun culture goes. It's not like we're just not going to follow your rules anymore. It's no, you can't do that. We're actively stopping you from doing that, from enforcing SBR law. And I mean this in a legal term. I'm not like inciting rebellion, but like have enough influence over our local politicians where the politicians go, okay, cool. We are going to find a solution for the ATF. That works for everybody involved. I mean, I don't want this to be some sort of petty, we don't like you, so you're a bad person kind of thing. It's just we're going to solve the problem and kind of be the adults in the room again. So, but yeah, what would you want to see in gun culture change or become the new de rigueur?
So much of the same thing. I really like to see. I think it needs to come. I think it has to come from the states. I think that's where we've seen it, and we're going to see it. We've seen it with right to carry laws. I mean, that is. I'm black-pilled on a lot of stuff too, but man, when you see how many states have adopted that right to carry, it's impressive. And you see states, I think it's especially Missouri, that are just like, hey, we're going to start being a Second Amendment sanctuary, but actually being real about it. I'd really like to see more states like that, but actually defy it and then stand up for the people who defy it. I think it was Keller. I think it was the Keller decision. I think that was that would have been in Kansas. But they had that where, hey, if you want to build a suppressor, build a suppressor. As long as you don't leave the state, then the ATF can't do anything about it.
Texas. That's Texas.
Was it Texas?
Yeah, Texas. It's the Texas. The Texas. That's definitely where that's happening.
Okay.
I have a very proud friend from Texas who won't shut up about it.
but like when the ATF went after them, the state just kind of went, okay, whatever, go after him. They should have. I think that attorney general should have been like, no, you can't do nothing to him. But they labeled that guy a felon. But I definitely think states are where it's at. I think that's where the gun community can kind of get in that back door and be involved locally and get the states. So I think the big thing is the states. I think getting them. But exactly like what you're saying is, it definitely has to go on the offense because we've compromised for so long and we're the only side who's compromising. And every time we compromise, we're the only ones who are compromising. We don't get anything out of it, and we just compromise more and more and more. And we need to go. The braces, the most recent thing with those braces, that's the best example of going. It shouldn't be just that we should be fighting like, no, we're going to keep braces. It should be, no, not only are we keeping braces don't even need to be a thing because we're removing SBRs and suppressors from the NFA. That should have been so easy for so-called pro-gun Republicans to jump on and go, no, I don't care about what your reasoning is for the pistol brace. I don't think you have a right to say that this gun is scary because it's shorter. Like, it's both of those are so ridiculous. The SBR and suppressors, it's just like, that's ridiculous. That's an easy thing to be on the offense about. So I think that's a huge one. I don't think you're going to see machine guns move from it, but SBRs and suppressors just seem so common sense, which I know that's not what politics is based on. Common sense, certainly not. But yeah, I think that would be the big thing that I think we could be on the offense on.
Yeah, no, politics is not based on common sense. Our politics is based on worldview and beliefs.
Yeah.
So it's politics is, I mean, no one ever says, well, we're about common sense. They're always saying like, we're going here. This is what we're doing. This is my objective. This is the direction we're going. Like, we're going to make America safer. We're going to make America great again. Or we're going to yada, yada. Like, it's always about us. We're here now. Change. Maybe that's just our generation, dude. Maybe that's just what it's like to be a millennial. It's, we're going to change things to what we don't know, but we're going to change,
But we're going there.
Yeah, but we're going there. Well, yeah, we are. Certainly are. All right, cool. So now, I mean, I think it's an amalgamous one, but I think I want to tap into that subject. You said, it needs to happen on the states, or it needs to happen on the states level. Or it is effective on the states level. I think we're done arguing on whether or not it needs to come from the top down or the bottom up. I think that, well, maybe not done arguing, but now is the time. Like, okay, how can you get involved on the state level or the county level? And some places we're seeing that. We're seeing the natural development of decentralization, or not redevelopment, but like re-entrenchment in decentralization. And I think it's going to happen one way or another. It's either going to be the big house is going to collapse and we're all going to have our decentralized governments and it's going to be chaotic, or we're just going to do it ourselves. And I definitely agree on the state side. Like, I moved from a rather blue state to I moved from Minnesota to Arizona, and it's not, and now that I've been here for even though I've only been here for a number of months, I have been here for less than a year. It now feels weird thinking that I have to go and apply for a permit to carry. Like, now it sounds weird. Like, it used to be like, oh wow, Arizona's cool. You don't have to have a permit to carry. But now I'm thinking like, if I go move back to Minnesota, I have to apply for a permit. I don't want to go to some random sheriff and be like, hey, please,
sir,
please, sir, please, sir, can I have my rights? No. Yep. If you have to ask, the answer is no. But yeah.
And I've said that, and people got all mad because Michigan has gotten bluer, which I just couldn't believe. I really couldn't believe after COVID and how crazy Whitmer was that she'd actually win again. But and then
the PSYOP was successful.
Yeah, but I'm like, so now I'm like, shoot, man, does that mean I'm gonna have to eventually like, does it make sense to go, all right, you know what we need to do? We need to fortify red areas. Do you go, or do you go? Because people were like, oh no, you got to stay and fight, and it's like, but you're not doing anything. You think stay and fight means, no, you just stay here and don't do anything. It's like
okay, so let's start answering that question, because it is a tough one. It certainly is. Like, okay, do we start reconsolidating? And I mean, we're gonna go red and blue, but let's just say our human rights versus pro infringe versus de-infringe areas. No, because I want to work on one more topic before we close, because we got some time. But like, I wanted to see, like, I don't know if that answers. I think the question is both and. Like, in some cases, like, unless if you're not going to make, not everyone can do this. Not everyone can make gun infringement, de-infringement their life's work. Like, they can't do it. Not all of us can be lawyers. Not all of us can be doctors. Not all of us can be philosophers. Not all of us can be Navy SEALs. We need specialization as well as general skill sets. And the natural course of humanity will change. We will move, but we want to be deliberate about certain things. You can only get so tyrannical before it all comes crumbling down. That's perhaps what history has taught us. What I hope it has taught us. But I think the answer is both and. Like, if you're using, well, I'm in a blue state as an excuse not to participate, that's on you. If you're leaving to a red state not to participate, that is also on you. But we can't, like, and I've thought about this even doing what we're doing now, is we're sitting here on a show that's that anyone in the world, well, depending on, but almost anyone in the world will be able to see or listen to. And I'm thinking, for as much advocating that I do about being involved in the local government, I'm pretty not involved, and that's wrong. I need to fix that. And I need to figure out how I'm going to do that. But I think my conscience has finally had enough of me saying, well, we need to decentralize and focus on local government, and and maybe I'm not going to run for office, but like, I feel I recognize that as much of advocacy as I'm doing about that, I'm not as much as I'm arguing for decentralization, I am not participating in decentralization. I'm actually looking at my life participating in isolation. I'm like moving away and getting away from people. And so like, that's a confession that I don't want to be happy about.
It's a hard one, and I think for at the lowest level, it's like, just show up. Just show up when there's something. And I really tried to make a concerted effort in that, 20 years ago in 2019, when the world was different. In 2019, I went to they did that Second Amendment march or whatever in DC. And so I flew there just for the day, just to go to it. And I was like, this probably isn't this might be dumb, but, it's like, but doesn't it look better to have more numbers? Doesn't it, like I was just talking about the red shirts and at Moms Demand Action, doesn't it look better when we have an event for people to show up, just being a number? And I've been to the state capitol here too, and other pro-gun rallies and stuff, and it's like, it's not that some are good, some just are kind of lame, but it's like, but I think showing politicians and stuff like that, hey, we're going to show up, hey, we're going to call, hey, we're going to email, stuff like that. I think that's important, and I think we take it for granted because we want to just say they don't listen to us or whatever. But I think there has to be some type of sway. I think just showing up in these kind of environments works, and if you're able to do more, then do more. But I think that from a standpoint of being like here in a blue state or even in a red state. And then I think if you're in a position where you can move them, man, that might be the better option. But I think some of those are in somewhat they're almost personal decisions, and you're kind of like what you're saying, it's both and, I don't think either one is wrong unless I just don't think either one is wrong. I think both have their merits.
Yeah, I think the question is too often used as a cop out, or calling somebody else for kind of copping out of something, like not a copping out of something, but I think that's my general impression of it. There's another example, and we'll kind of roll into that one, which is this idea of like there's a coming crisis or a civil war or a conflict or the fourth turning, and I'm gonna end up talking about the subject a couple times, just because I think it's relevant to gun culture, because the idea of being able to defend yourself or preparing to be able to defend yourself sort of implies that there's at least the potential that you might need to, or you might be in a position where you should, and since that's like, well, in some ways that can be self-generated, like you can move to an area where it's more likely, or you can adopt mannerisms which encourage people to attack you. That's another way of saying it, but it doesn't make it right. It's the same issue that you have the problem with, like the girl in the short skirt in the dark hallway, thing. Is that like, was it right? No. But did it happen? Yes. And did you encourage it? No. But was that a wise thing to do? No, kind of thing. And I think wisdom is necessary. Like, two things can be true at the same time, that she is not responsible for the criminality that, or the things that were done to her, but she is responsible for putting herself in a position where she should have known better, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so like those are in tension with each other, and the same thing goes to gun, like our gun rights and our thoughts. And so you see this a lot come out in like libertarianism. Now I'm looking at your logo and it's like black and yellow, which the gun arguments oftentimes point out to like this concept of libertarianism, which is, I mean, libertarianism is another way of, I think to some people it's similar as like the trendy, like the middle. Oh, I'm a centrist. Like, well, everyone thinks of them. I mean, not everyone, but it's trendy to be a centrist. Okay. Even if you have like far left, left, because everyone wants to be, I'm reasonable and you're not. I'm a free thinker and you're not. I'm a, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, well, I'm a libertarian and I don't want anyone's rights to be tread on. And it's like, okay. Which I'm not representing libertarianism well right there, but do you like, are you a libertarian? Are you?
It's kind of weird because I would say I definitely was while writing the book. I would say I definitely was. And then I would say 2020 and 2021 was a pressure cooker of ideas. And it was kind of like, man, I don't think that it's weird. I would say I'm a small L libertarian, not a big L libertarian.
How do you describe the difference?
Massey, stuff like that. Big L libertarian being part of the party. Like I would think that I don't think the party has any purpose. I don't think they can win elections, and I think it's almost gotten goofy in a way. I think they're great people in that party, but I think I'd rather be a small L libertarian of like, yeah, I definitely believe. I'd even say I hold to the non-aggression principle and stuff like that, but I just don't. I think 2020 and 2021 really proved that, as far as a political philosophy, that's just you can't keep on saying, yeah, but what if the roles were reversed? I don't think.
Give me an example. What do you mean by that?
There should be an easy one.
Like who is saying that to who?
Like you see it in man, it's a good example of
we should okay, let's do the right to protest. Who is saying it to who? Like protesting is a right, whether or not that's a right at all.
That's a good example. You have the oh shoot. No, I'm losing my train of thought.
That's quite all right.
A lot of it was just you see with the contradictions, but let's just say with
the libertarian response to like the protesting would be like, okay, we need to stop. Like I was in Minneapolis during that time, and there were there's this conversation of some people were protesting and some people were rioting, and sometimes it was the same person and sometimes it wasn't. And you could say something like, we need to stop these people, right? We need to, because they're burning down buildings, and the most effective way to stop them would be to break up the protests earlier on in the day, which probably wouldn't work. It probably would have had an absolute backlash, right? If you had tear gas the quote unquote peaceful protesters at noon in Uptown, you would have probably lost all of Uptown by the end of the evening, because it would have only stoked the rage. That's just a utility of the argument. But I am saying from like a libertarian perspective is like, don't build the apparatus of the state, like say the NSA or something like that, because it might be used against you. And maybe a political libertarian would say something like that. I don't want to like misrepresent it completely, but it seems like when something like that comes up, libertarianism comes across as like a really good moral philosophy, but not a very good political philosophy, because they will use it against you. You are absolutely correct. And then if you don't build it for them, they'll build it themselves, and then they'll use it against you. And that line of thinking is exactly the thing that I find so distasteful about left-wing political ideology, is that their base assumption is that everyone on the right wants to kill them, so they should build the state to destroy the right. It's this Antifa style mentality, is that their base assumption requires that everyone who is not them is a monster and needs to be crushed. And it's like, okay, congratulations, you rid the world of Nazism. Now you're literally the worst thing ever. You're worse than the Nazis somehow. Like, and I'm not saying that, you know, like our contemporary Antifa peoples are like worse than the Nazis. I'm saying that I see in a lot of left-wing Civil War style literature is they make the argument that their political opponents, all of their political opponents want to do is murder and kill across the country. And you're like, okay, I can't take this seriously.
Yeah.
So, but okay, so let's break down libertarianism real quick then, because you said you changed your opinion on this one, and let's keep it restricted to guns. Libertarianism as a political philosophy, or libertarianism as a moral philosophy? When it comes to guns, how do you distinguish? How would you distinguish the two? Because it seems to get a little fuzzy.
Yeah, so trying to think of it from a libertarian standpoint, how I define that. Well, partly there are libertarians who are just pacifist. I guess if I were to say, probably, so I'll go back to Antifa. So when I wrote this book, I probably would have been more on the line of like, I think I even made a Instagram post. Remember when Virginia was having that big gun rally? They had their big rally.
Yeah.
Huge thing.
And everyone thought
Antifa
is going to be violent and weird.
Yeah. And of course, it was perfectly peaceful for the most part, except for the bad actors but anyway. But it's like Antifa was also there to stand up for their right to own guns. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. We should be together with them. And I think I tweeted something like that, like, hey, guys, if you're there, you should meet up and we can find common ground. I would have definitely thought that at that time. And I think, I don't think I had it up for 10 minutes before somebody's like, that's really a bad idea. And I started looking and I was like, that is dumb. and so now I completely think of it the opposite. But I'd say that was definitely much more of my libertarian position of going, hey, we can find these common ground, and I support all these rights. And as far as like Antifa, I think you see it a lot in libertarian social media where you have like, you'll see the guys defending drag shows for kids, and you'll see Antifa with guns, and the gun community be like, I think this is neat that they're standing up for themselves and that they're also embracing guns. And it's like, I can completely agree that they have a right to do something. And I can also agree that I don't think it's cool. Like, I also like, oh, neat, my enemy has guns. I don't really think that's my enemy is arming up. I don't think that's a positive. I can completely support their rights to do so, and also not go, oh man, I really want to meet them. They're so brave. So I would say that's also where I would have changed as far as a libertarian mindset.
Okay, so so the change in mindset comes from a transition from. So because the way that you phrase it makes it sound like you added context. That at one point in time you believe that everyone should be able to. It's great that anyone who's involved is or a part of it. Going back to this, the rally is like, oh, okay, we have common ground, and because we both believe that we should have guns, then we're. You know, like we're in this together in the sense of like, if you leave me alone and I leave you alone, we'll be fun. We'll just get along, right? This sort of not isolationist, but a little bit atomized, a little bit like that. And now it's it seems like you have this basically this non-aggression concept from the beginning, and now an added context being yes, but you also can't do that, and you are actively working to destroy me in other ways. I'm not okay. I mean, I don't know. I can't quite say that like the child drag shows is necessarily an active attempt to destroy me, but it is to destroy anything that I have, anything that upholds my values. Like if you have to force churches to accept it, I would have issues with that. Or businesses, or like if the government has to hire an office, or if the government forces private corporations to hire an officer to determine the religious, how do I say this? To scry the company for religious fervor for whatever the current thing is, i.e., like the trans flag thing, the gay flag thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have an issue with that, just like I would have an issue in the sense of the state imposing a religion. Well, this is exactly why I have an issue with that. Is that, like, I think the state should enforce us to have the right to own guns, but should not be enforcing the religion of the state, which is the trans thing or the whatever. And like that I do have an issue with, because I definitely see it as like a religious movement. It's a metaphysic. It begins with a metaphysic with a hierarchy of values, and then it imposes some sort of standard of action. And those people can't just. It's not that people can just exist. They have to affirm. They have to say the words and be absolved of their guilt and their original sin of judgment or whatever. And so exactly. Like I have issues with that, but so like that's where my libertarianism has changed, is that like, not only do I think it's not effective for us to just get along, I don't think it's right. I don't think we can, I don't think you can do whatever you want. I think there's a,
I think like it's kind of how we were just talking about, like growing. It's like you can, you have that. I think libertarianism, I like a lot of their thinkers, Murray Rothbard and stuff like that, but even Murray Rothbard would be with us right now, I mean, it's just, once you look at it in practice, and like I said, the last few years have really, really put it in a pressure cooker of like, dang, man, there's some things that it can't just be all kumbaya and stuff.
It can't just be all live and let live.
Yeah, you don't just shake hands over this and go, okay, well, you go ahead and exploit that 6-year-old. It's all good.
Well,
no biggie.
It also can be taken. It's also prone, if not necessarily, will be taken advantage of, because you choose not to be aggressive, but I'm not. I'm not bound by your morals, so I'll be aggressive to you.
Mm-hmm.
Or the non-aggression principle. My political issue with libertarianism is it's kind of utopian. If everyone believed the same values, like that didn't have, if everyone was perfectly capable of and they were perfect, libertarianism would function. So would communism and whatever, because none of it would matter. And so we might want to strive towards that ideal, but we don't do those things. Like, we're not perfect beings. We're not basically good. We have licentiousness, and we have the evil desires in ourselves and in others, and I don't see any good argument for people being basically good. I think
you just do not see it either. Like, I think did you ever watch Monopoly of Violence? Pete Quinones, Mance Raider used to go by. Anyway, he made that documentary. It was really good, but he kind of changed. He changed a lot. He went from libertarianism and then went, hey, a lot of people are just living in Ancapistan in their head. And that's exactly right. That's, people are like, well, this is what we should be doing. And it's like, yeah, but that's not reality. Like, I like that idea. I embrace that idea, but that's not what this world is. And it sucks. And yeah, exactly like what you said, we don't live in that utopia, and that's not how politics work. It's not how, it's like, yeah, I wish it did, but that ain't how it is. So
yeah, maybe like political libertarianism is the utopia of suicide, and And like communism is the utopia of the crusade. It just never ends. You must believe the thing. You must believe the state. Communism is very Warhammer 40K. You must support the thing. Just funny how that's like. It's funny how that fictional World Series is. It seems like, in my opinion, it does this in relevancy is like now we're getting a Henry Cavill in a show and then, but it's not like it's a steady climb. It's like, oh, it was a thing when I was a kid, and then it kind of dissolved into nothing during the 2010s, and now it's a thing again. Maybe it's just my observation. I'm sure Games Workshop had a great COVID boon when everyone was locked inside and getting paid money by the government, so they bought little plastic figures and carved stuff. But maybe I'm facetious.
Oh, you got to 3D print that stuff. That stuff's all over 3D print room.
Oh, well, I need to get a 3D printer now, so that's cool. So that's a harsh distraction. Oops. I don't here's the reality. I don't have time for the hobby. I just don't.
It'll suck you in, and geez, now I have 3 printers. Yeah, you'll get addicted.
Yeah, I should get I do need to get a 3D printer, that's for sure, but whatever. So libertarianism as a political philosophy, it seems to be when we're talking about a political philosophy, we're focusing on government. Okay, that makes sense. And when we're looking at libertarianism as a political philosophy, argues for a small government, and it makes an argument that a small government limited to the protection of individuals' rights will function properly, or something like that. Like it's like this government of leave me alone, which is not a good descriptor of it. And I would agree with you that unfortunately the challenge with libertarianism is you have like Robert Nozick type libertarians, and then you have like, well, I guess you can't do Michael Malice, but Robert Nozick was a very intelligent man who wrote a book called Anarchy, State, and Utopia, where he defines what libertarianism means, and argues for it from there. Whereas a lot of libertarianism is just kind of like leave me alone libertarianism, but as a moral philosophy is something completely different.
It's weird. I've seen a lot of the gun community. I think they say that they're libertarians, but I almost think that's pretty much how you started out. Like, I think they want to say that so that way they don't have to be political. It's an easy cop out, because if you say, well, I'm Republican, then you got to say, well, then who are you voting for, and all this other kind of stuff. Where if you're a libertarian, if somebody's like, well, who are you voting for? Oh, I'm a libertarian. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't count. Or I'm a libertarian. I don't like any of these guys. And it's like, I think you're just trying to cop out. And I think I see that sometimes with the gun community.
I would agree with the criticism that it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go that far. I will agree with the criticism that it happens. I think sometimes it is an intellectual escapism thing, like, oh, the utopia of and like it's the utopianism of like Ayn Rand objectivism. There is a challenge to it, but rather I think the value of libertarianism is when we look at it as a moral philosophy, and we say, well, okay, libertarianism when we look at it as a moral philosophy is very different. It is individuals have rights, and liberty liberty is not just a utility, it's a thing that we promote and we produce and we base our culture on. And liberty is the will of the individual, minimally infringed and maximally capable of pursuing what they believe they should pursue, knowing that people will not always pursue things that are good for them. And so as a moral philosophy, it's immoral for you to infringe on somebody else's liberty, to at least in some extent. I mean, it's immoral for me to infringe on your liberty to defend yourself. Well, it's not really a liberty, it's a right. But your liberty to dispense with your property as you so please. So I can argue, but I can't coerce or something. I can't force.
Yeah, I love the guys at Mises. I think they're great. Like Tho Bishop and Jeff Deist and Ryan McMaken's great on guns too. But they've done a great job at like this is small L libertarianism. This is, the morality side, but also saying, the political side really sucks. I mean, they advocate for small government, but they're reasonable, intelligent human beings.
Well, you have to get a big government before you can get a small government, because you have to get a government big enough to make it small. You have to get a government big enough for it to shatter into pieces. No, that's lunacy. That is lunacy. We don't want to go there. But let's wrap up on one more subject for today. And I think what it would be really neat to do is to kind of go through your book and your arguments kind of chapter by chapter in the future, and just address, like, what are you making? What's the argument that you're making when you're referring to your natural rights argument? And what's the argument that you're making when you're referring to the Constitution? And what's the argument that you're making in reference to gun control? Because I think that one of the things that I've been encouraged by this book about is that it takes so much of this random scattering and polka dot pattern that is in gun culture, for better or for worse, and it puts it all between two covers. So sometimes, I haven't finished the book, but like when you're tracing the beginning sections, there's an argument made by this guy, and then an argument made by this guy, and then an argument made by this guy, and an argument made by this guy, and an argument, and it keeps going and going and going, and so that I'm able to trace through all of these events. And then we could also look back at like the history of gun control and say, well, as Maj Touré says, he says all gun control is racist, right? That's him.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could, and we could address, many of these subjects and conversations that get brought up by gun culture, or actually I think are brought up against gun culture that it has to defend against. And you do a pretty good I'm sorry, I can't give you an evaluative statement on it, but I'm looking forward to reading those parts, because like you take all these different commonly held conversations and you produce answers for them. Is that safe to say that was your objective?
Yeah, basically their proposals and the arguments against them. So I mean, it can be as simple, like earlier I stated, people who argue that you're more likely to kill a family member. And it's like, well, where does that statistic come from? What does that statistic actually say? And here's the truth. Red flag laws, all those different things. Age restrictions, magazine capacity limits, stop and frisk, social credit, no fly, no buy. Real men don't need guns, compensating for penis size. I try to get them all.
And so then would you think about writing a second book on like the aggressive arguments, like the aggressive as in like because it seems like in that way that you basically do write it in a sense in the form of like a dissertation where you make your argument and you draw its history and then you defend it against critics. But would you be interested in writing another one?
I haven't really thought about it like that. I think what I've looked at so far is more or less I'd either make a second edition and add a bunch of stuff to it. It was really my intent to try to do that by the end of this year, but I never did it. I got too busy. Or I would do a second one that was like more gun control proposals in their arguments. I think partially I'd probably like to do two. I'd like to do a second version because there's things that I found that have like probably strengthened arguments. There's things where I can't think of any off the top of my head. I have tons of notes on it, but like that I could think of that I could strengthen it. Other ones, just kind of beef it up. Other things, I'm trying to think of the one that I want. What I had some that they came across a few times, and I never included it because I thought it was such a dumb, like, nobody thinks that. Like there's no reason to add it or it didn't fit or something like that. So I'm like, oh, I'll cover it. And then I came across it like 3 or 4 times and I'm like, oh crap, maybe I really do have to cover that. But But yeah, I don't. I think really the only thing I've ever thought about doing is really just expanding this one and adding more, adding more. Um, but
Do you think that
yeah,
the right to self-defense is ever something that can be like advocated for, or is it all something that has to be defended?
oh, I think it should be advocated for. Um,
Well, sometimes I
yeah,
ask the question: is it like if it can?
mhm.
Like it's not it's not to be too like depressed about it, but it's like you can you really advocate for it, or is it that you have to defend its existence? It's I'm sorry, defend its
Yeah.
enforcement within the state. Like
Yeah, I mean, you really bring up a good point. So much of this really is almost,
like I
it's putting up a defense, but never putting up like a very,
it's never going
I guess the word
it's never going on the
You're right.
offense. It's like so like if a police officer if I get quote unquote red flagged, whether or not that's legal at
Hmm.
the time doesn't matter, and I go to jail or they take all my stuff, whatever. Um, I have to go and essentially defend my right to own something, which in that sense is guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
And then when we can understand that it's exactly what it is, it's exactly the antithesis of what we believe as a virtue, um, which again is one of the reasons why I think that that far left political philosophy, which states that all conservatives are evil, racist, whatever, want to kill people things, is so egregious, is because they basically are declaring they're making moral judgment upon humanity,
Hmm.
and then forcing what their political opponents to prove that they're not bad people. It's like we that never ends well, and not only does it never end well, and so it's not utilitarian, it's just immoral.
Hmm.
But so I can go to a judge and I can appeal my position, or I can go to a judge and defend and say, hey, I have these rights and they were not taken justly, and blah blah blah. So then then I have to defend my right to be in possession, but I can't. But that's not something I can do in the offense. Rather, like what does an offensive gun culture look like, or gun culture on the offense look like? And I think that might be something like, if you infringe on somebody's rights, you lose the privilege of functioning in government. I think that's the closest way I could think of it as being on the offense, is that you have advocated for and produced this law, which has not only been denied by the Supreme Court, but by advocating for it, it's not that you are guilty of doing violence, but aggressing on your own population. In an essence, stripping them of arms is an act of war. You're not necessarily a traitor in the same. You haven't committed treason like somebody selling secrets to Russia, but it is something like you have discredited or broken your position in government. Is there a better
Hmm.
word for it?
Well, I mean, in one way, it's like it's a breach of contract. I mean, you swore to, you swore to uphold the Constitution, and I think that's what I kind of put that with the ATF. I give some of the anti-gunners some kind of like sway or whatever, like, oh, maybe you guys aren't all bad, but the ATF, it's like you're in clear violation of the Second Amendment. I mean,
And it doesn't matter
it,
it doesn't matter whether or
yeah,
not your intentions are good or not. I would agree with that one.
yeah, it's like no, it clearly says this. Like, it's the most basic, like the Bill of Rights, completely for the federal government. It says do not infringe, and that's what you're doing. Like, it doesn't take a child can figure that out. You don't need a law degree. You don't need anything else. It's like you can just read it. Like, oh, the Bill of Rights for this federal government. Okay, connect that dot. Connect that dot. You're infringing. Like,
Yeah.
you're bad. You're a
You may
bad
not.
person.
Yeah, you're a bad person. You
Yeah.
are a bad person.
Yep.
All right.
Shame on you.
Shame on you. So, last question in regards to the book. When you were writing it, what was one time where you came across something where like you had kind of a light bulb moment, or like for me, I was reading this one and when you were talking about it, about incorporation of the Bill of Rights into the
Mhm.
states, I was like, I never thought of that before. Now, given and somebody who went to American history might say that's just normal, but like for me, I was like, wow, I never thought of that.
Incorporation, ratification, 14th Amendment. That I had no basis for. It was weird. I was writing it, and I wasn't really even getting into that, but I was listening to. It was actually Jeff Dice from the Mises Institute and Brian McClanahan. It was a podcast where they were talking about the 14th Amendment, and they were explaining ratification and incorporation, and I was like, that finally was a light bulb moment of like, oh, that's why there's a Bill of Rights and a Constitution for the federal government, and a Bill of Rights and a Constitution for each state. I was like, why in the world did I never realize? Why, like, yeah, of course. Like, why in the world does, like the state of Michigan has a Second Amendment, and it's actually a pretty good one. It even says like an individual's right to defend themselves. So it's real good. But but I remember thinking like, well, why the hell do they have that if I have the Second Amendment? Why did we need both? And when they explained it, I was like, holy crap. I was like, that makes sense. I didn't realize that was just for the federal government and stuff.
Is that something that's available online right now?
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I'll look it up and I'll send it right over to you. It's a really good talk. And then there's another name. I'll send it to you. It was an article that I think was from the 10th Amendment Center. But I used it a lot. From one of the guys from the 10th Amendment Center, his name is Michael Maharry, and he wrote a book called Constitution Owner's Manual. And he goes into the Supremacy Clause, which is another big one, incorporation and ratification. And he explains it really well, and he gives some more links of like the guy who's the creme de la creme, like Harvard law and actually Berkeley law as well, was Raoul Berger. R-A-O-L, Raoul, whatever.
Yeah, Raoul.
And he, however you want to say it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get that book. And I'll read it to do that. It's like a volume series. It's like, okay, I'm not going to read War and Peace for this one. There's, enough people have read it and kind of broken it down. But yeah, that Constitution Owner's Manual, that's a real good one. And because they just kind of simplify it. But yeah, I definitely think, just like you, the incorporation one was definitely a light bulb, and has a lot of implications as far as states' rights. But I love that one because it's, and people still like no, that's not the 14th Amendment did this, and it's like, no, that's not what happened. That's not what the arguments were. The arguments, they even argued. At that time, they were arguing, well, now the Bill of Rights is going to apply to the states, and the reps were like, no, that's not true. And there was even Supreme Court case later on that were like, no, Bill of Rights doesn't apply to the states and stuff like that. So it's kind of crazy how that we take it for granted that it does. But
yeah, I think often, if not sometimes, if not often, I don't think either of those words make any sense. I think it is tragic but true that oftentimes we mistake. How am I trying to say this? There's this idea that we approach the Constitution like it's a magic book, like the government and the politician. If I can understand the Constitution better, I can say the words that will convince people to do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, that functions absolutely. If you and I are coming together and have a conversation about the Constitution, and we both agree to that it's a framework by which we're going to act by, yeah, sure. Then we can no, the ratification process, it functions this way. It's an apparatus. It's a machine. But the machine is not permanent. It's not actually physical. It's an abstract object by which we live by. And if we decide to throw out the machine, the mechanism of the Constitution, and don't replace it with something, it will be replaced with. It will be replaced. We just won't be choosing that which replaces it. And the natural course of human history suggests that which replaces it is not good. Whether it's the closest thing we've seen to brutalistic anarchism or feudalism or whatever we want to talk about, because these political philosophies are not simply ideas, they're structures. And there will be a structure. The question is which. And so the radical revolutionaries who say things like revolution ad infinitum, what will we do after this revolution? We'll have another, are not necessarily just the fools, but they're like, those are the people that make Stalin possible. That make, the massive atrocities possible, because they're in support of the thing. I support the current thing issue. And and so when we look at the Constitution, I think it's very easy to kind of reduce it into like a magic book, sort of a mysticism. But then on the other side, it's also very easy to just kind of throw it all out for some sort of might makes right brutalism. And when we look at gun culture, it's so easy to get depressed and say we're always under attack. It's never going anywhere. It's always this. It's all corruption and greed. And like with a spattering of the drip and the trend and the cool stuffs, and the operators and stuff like that, like to as like a contrast. But I think I am still a part of gun culture because there's something so much deeper here than trends and trends and social structures and looking cool for Instagram. I think there's just, we don't grow up as young boys wanting to buy swords and fight dragons because sword is thing. It's like it's because it means something deeper, and so that's what we're in pursuit of. Well,
yeah, man, it's kind of funny. I went down this trail before of like, isn't it weird that and I'm a big enough conspiracy theorist that I think it's intentional, but how there's just no real fraternal organizations anymore for dudes. Any other, let's say demographic, females, whatever. It's like it's encouraged that they get together and that they hang out and that they have a community. But with guys, it's really not. You used to have the Moose Lodge and the Elk Lodge and bowling clubs and all these other little kind of things, and there's just not that anymore. And I almost think about like, well, maybe that is what the gun culture is, as far as, is that going out and training with your friends? Is that having some type of community where you can all rally around and believe, or on a common cause or something like that? I wonder if there's something in that where you do have some type of fraternal.
Well, look at
guns are just for guys, but
Well, look at the way that we talk about things, right? It's the gun community, the LGBTQ community, the black community, the whatever community, right? It's like I would agree that gun culture is in a movement. I think gun culture is moving away from rampant individualism towards sort of a community-ish focus. I think that's a bit of a trend. But it's also like not new, because there's been, we've talked about tribe, we've talked about many other, like being a part of the squad, the unit, the team. Why did people join the military? Because the camaraderie. It's like, yes, we are hungry for tribe, but we are hungry for community. I can see that. And I think that I do believe, quite frankly, that there are people who are actively trying to destroy and limit and get rid of or inhibit people's ability and they want to shame people's commitment to a community. And some of that is good, not good. Some of that is justified in the sense of like, we just as much as we don't, just as much as we have a frustration of not having some sort of community handed down to us, like we'll look at our novels and our stories, it's always like, Jimmy, your father was a grand wizard in the magical kingdom. You're one too, kind of thing. It's this, how many of our stories are like the character finds out that he's like part of the order. You're part of the order of assassins. You're part of the order of this. Yeah. It's like, we have this desire for it, but like that requires sacrifice, dude. And how many of us are willing to do it? Very few. And so the last remaining vestige of it was like special operations for a while. And now that's getting watered down and getting replaced. But at the same time, you see it in other communities where like you're not where there's like what was it? What's an example of like you want to see gatekeeping? Go look at like the gay community. Like, sorry, you're not this enough to be a part of my group. Now I don't have all the grounds to say it. Or another example would be like, it's not. I don't want to even go down that road anymore. But I get it. We have this inherent desire for the dangerousness of being part of the community. I think that we way too often disregard cults for being a bunch of stupid people following a smart but malicious person, and rather cults impart meaning to the members. The world has order again. You're a part of the thing. And so I'm not saying that we should go advocate for cults, but that's the allure of it. That and secret knowledge or Gnosticism. So, yeah, I think gun culture is gonna naturally figure out ways to create its own little circles, and it does. But we need it. But it will not come quickly. I think that we are in the time where we build the institutions. You and I live in the era where, because the Boy Scouts were taken away from us, we are going to have to create the new Boy Scouts. Like, if you look at the history of the Boy Scouts and how it was started, like that was some pretty rad stuff. And then it got watered down, and then it got watered down, and then it got watered down, and then it got soft, and then it got, and institutions do that. But that doesn't mean that you condemn the concept of institutions. It means you have to build a new one. If you're a part of a woke church, leave that church and start a new one. Be careful though, because it does require a lot of you. If you're a part of, and I mean, it's the same thing. That's even the biblical thing. Like, if you go do it, you will be judged differently. But you also, or you could just stagnate. And gun culture can do the same. Like, we can continue to grow our communities and build our own culture, but it'll take time. And maybe we'll be planting the seeds that, as the fourth turning is still trendy in our day and age, we will live through the crisis, and our children will be the ones who emerge out of the crisis. And I'm not so worried about surviving the apocalypse per se. I'm more concerned about what philosophy will survive it and be the foundation for the next generation. I think that's where I'm at in life now. So that's why I took interest in your book, and I'm really glad we had you on the show today. So,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
The easiest thing is just, you can either go to Instagram and go to Deinfringe, and then I have all my links there. Or you can just go to deinfringe.com, and that takes you everywhere. It'll take you to the book, take you to do some t-shirt stuff at ballisticink.com. But if you just go to Deinfringe, you can find all that stuff. Just deinfringe.com.
DEINFRINGE. That's Deinfringe. Gotcha. Cool.
Yep.
Well,
the sources for the book are on that as well. So I try to do that so that way I have all the sources in the back of the book, but obviously it's harder to type all those links in. So you can just go to the actual you can go to the actual website, copy and paste your source, and see what I was reading.
Gotcha. No, absolutely. Well, what are you working on now? What are you producing something for 2023?
What I really want to do is I really want to get that either expanded edition out, or I think that's probably the best thing to do is expanded edition. So I've been trying to compile notes for that. Like I said, I got a ton of them. So I need to organize my thoughts and try to work on that. And yeah, just kind of.
Well,
clean it up a bit. So
I look forward to hearing from you. I can't imagine that's a quick process, but for everyone that's listening, this is a book that should be on your shelf. It's definitely it's so far. I mean, I guess I can't say evaluatively on the whole thing, and I'd rather read an argument that I don't like than not read anything at all. But well, Josh, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for having this difficult and kind of odd. It is the first discussion of the year. Let's do this again sometime.
yeah, definitely, man.
And then
Thanks a ton.
thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, in closing, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast. I am your host, Forrest. Most of you know who I am, but you know what we're about to. So this show is coming out in the beginning of January in 2023. Please, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to our website at redactedllc.com. We've got some new patches and stickers coming out. Otherwise, if we're looking at sort of we're looking at 2023, and we got a lot of big plans. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and we will see you soon.